Our next guest is a very good friend of mine. He's a New York City Transit bus driver, bus operator by trade. He started in Flatbush Depot. Then he moved on to Staten Island, became the president, moved up into the International ATU. Staten Island, of course, is Amalgamated Transit, not TWU, and has just recently won the presidency of the International Amalgamated Transit Union, Larry Hanley.
Thank you, Local 100. John actually stole a point I wanted to make that many of you probably did not know until a second ago. I started in 1978 in Flatbush Depot in TWU. I was a member for a year and a half and very active at that time. I'm sure there's nobody left who remembers me from those days, but I did spend about 16 years as president in Staten Island, the Local 726. And Flatbush was where I got my start. I'm not going to talk for long, but I do want to emphasize we are in the worst crisis of my lifetime in transit, and it's been a fairly long lifetime in transit compared probably to most in this room. In 2010, more federal money was spent on transit than any year in history. Let me say that again because it sounds, as George Carlin used to say, vaguely important. More money was spent by our federal government last year, in this last 12-month period, on transit than any year in history. And yet, while that was going on, we have suffered the worst fare increases, the worst service cuts, and the worst layoffs all over the country, at least since World War II. When I was hired as a bus driver in Flatbush in 1978, the city was coming off a fiscal crisis in which cops were laid off, firemen were laid off, people were laid off in every agency of the city, but not bus drivers. It didn't happen. For the first time in at least 50 years, members of my local in Staten Island and members of Local 100 who drive buses were laid off, and that is not a mistake. That's not an accident. That is intentional and it's deliberate. And I just want to tell you that back in October of '09, just about a year ago, our members in Detroit, we represent most of the transit systems in the United States and Canada, and we partner with TWU in a lot of different ways, and I want to talk to you about that too as we move through today. But last October, 25% of my members in Detroit got laid off in one day. 25% of the system wiped out, gone, finished, has not come back. Some of those members, because of attrition, have gotten their jobs back. But the mayor, now this is Michigan, a formerly heavily unionized state. The mayor then took away the dues checkoff on his own from the unions, all of them in the city, and forced them to the table and forced them to make concessions. In Chicago, on February 7th of this year, 1,100 transit workers were laid off. I'm told it's 14% of all the service in Chicago, bus and train, was cut back in February. And an alarm went out among transit workers around the country. People started to say, well, what are we going to do? And there were leadership discussions that culminated on February 27th of this year in New York City in a whole bunch of local unions, primarily MTA, New Jersey Transit, but we had local union leaders come from as far away as Oakland, California in a blizzard. You may remember the blizzard back in February. And we got together and we had a big discussion about how we were going to try and fight back and how we were going to try and mobilize the labor movement to deal with this. And I just want to pause for a second and thank your leadership. And let me tell you, how many people here joined us in Washington when 3,000 people went down to Washington to appeal? Give yourself a round of applause. Well, the leadership of Local 100 and John Samuelson attended the first meeting and everyone since, and we tried to, with both internationals working together, to build a campaign to get out there and change that. What we found is although there was a campaign and rallies throughout the states, we were unable to get politicians, including our own president, including our own Congress. You know, we all went to the polls and elected Democrats to Congress and Democrats to the Senate and a Democrat to the White House, and a lot of us thought, well, that was it. We had it made. But they have not listened, and we have to make them listen. And so, that's right. You know, there's a great deal of symbolism in the fact that we have our first African-American mayor, and that's a wonderful thing. We also have our first our first African-American president I was involved in electing the first African-American mayor. It's a very dear thing to me, but we have our first urban president, someone who came up through the streets of Chicago and understood the problems of people in urban America, and there is no urban policy in America, and we have to make them hear us and change that. And so I just want to tell you that I've only been in office a month, but we have been talking with people in your local, with John and Jim Little and folks in your international and many others. And our next step, the thing that's cooking up right now that we're putting together, is we're going to try and find a way to go a little bit deeper. We're going to try and find a way not to go to politicians and ask them for a favor, but rather go out and organize the people who ride our buses in subways all over the country and get them to stand up with us and demand that transit be funded again. And we hope, and I thank you. I attended for a little bit the meeting held earlier regarding the Solidarity Fund, and there was some discussion among some folks that I've known over the years about getting away from Democrats and Republicans, and frankly, we can do that. And I think the way we do it is not just to get out there and point fingers at them, but let's go out and organize the people who ride our buses of any party, of any political stripe, and the ones who ride our trains and get them to stand with us and fight. Finally, I know, although I haven't been around that much lately, I certainly know that there has been some controversy connected to your Solidarity Fund. I want to tell you there are Solidarity Funds all over the country right now, but you're the only ones who got together and voted to take care of the people that got laid off. The Solidarity Fund, yeah. Don't underestimate that, but also let me tell you just for 1 second about the kind of solidarity funds that were imposed on us. In the BART system in Oakland, California, as a result of these budget shortfalls, our local out there went into contract negotiations, ended up with a 4-year contract with no wage increase for 4 years. Throughout America, city after city, Cleveland, Cincinnati, Sacramento, there have been layoffs, and what happens? The minute, and you've been through it, and you may not have recognized how they tried to play you and the value of what you did in response to that. In Chicago, and this is the one story I'll tell you, but believe me, this has been the model all over the country. In Chicago, about 3 or 4 days before the layoffs actually happened, this was over 1,000 ATU members. The mayor summoned, we have 2 locals, 1 bus and 1 rail in Chicago, and the mayor summoned the 2 presidents of the 2 locals down to City Hall. And waiting outside City Hall, this was for a meeting, a private meeting with the mayor. And waiting outside City Hall was every camera in Chicago. And our local presidents did a perp walk into City Hall. And the story there was, these are the 2 guys who can stop your service from being cut. Suddenly the weight of all of what the bankers did and all of the shenanigans in Wall Street fell on the shoulders in Chicago of 2 presidents of ATU locals who were blamed publicly for the fact that Chicago was going to be losing chunks of its transit system. And they were told by the mayor, it doesn't have to happen. All you have to do is open up your contract. Take some cuts. And he didn't just say it to them in the office, he said it to them on television. And they went back to their members, and they told their members they didn't want to do it, and the members agreed with them. And they took no cuts, but they took the layoffs. And that's the story, the first part of the story. But here's the second part. Within about a week, a Catholic priest in Chicago held a press conference with a bunch of our members who got on TV and blamed their union because they were laid off. They played right into the message that was being put out there by the Chicago Transit Authority and by the mayor of Chicago. And they attacked their union publicly and said, it's the union's fault you're losing your service. Here's the point. None of these things are happening in a vacuum. This is a national attack on us. Folks all over the country are trying to figure out ways to respond. We're trying to do it through bargaining, and we're doing it through strikes. We have a local in Worcester, Mass. that will be going on strike next week. And the strikes are starting to break out. Richmond, Virginia, on strike right now. But throughout all of these blackmail situations, the brothers and sisters that stood up here before who were laid off, they're hostages. They were taken hostage by the MTA, and you have to recognize that. And the value of what you did, regardless of the process, the value of what you did by saying, we may not be able to keep you employed, We're not going to let the MTA cut our contract into paper dolls with this threat, but we're going to stand with you, and we're going to make sure that when you need a hospital, you get it. When you need a doctor, you get it. I take my hat off to you. TWU. So I have many friends in this room. I have many coworkers, brothers and sisters, people, some of whom know me very well, and some of whom I believe have disagreed with this move. I just want to say to you, whatever differences there may be, as we move forward, we're going to have to find a way to get agreement on the smart things. And I believe this was a smart and very valuable thing. And finally, as the new international president of the ATU, I just want to hold out my hand to you and say to you, we will be there to work with you. It is our intention to work more closely with TWU than ever in history. But please work with us. Let's get together and fight the right people. Thank you very much. And thank you, John.